Welcome to the Book Nook. I'm so glad you're joining us today because normally when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of just absolute precision, you know?
Right, like a very clear-cut answer.
Exactly. You break your arm, you go to the hospital, they take an x-ray, and it shows that jagged white line on the black background. And the doctor just points to it and says, there it is. That's the problem.
It's entirely binary. I mean, it's either broken or it's not.
Right. And it's comforting. We really like things to be visible, to be neatly categorized like that. But then you step into the world of professional career transitions, like stepping into a new leadership role, joining a new company, or even just, I don't know, taking on a massive new project, and suddenly that x-ray machine is completely broken.
Oh, completely. It's gone.
We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is honestly just murky. There's no simple image to show you where the organizational fractures are.
No, it is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters, because you are stepping into this incredibly complex ecosystem of human behavior, unwritten rules, entrenched politics, and hidden histories.
Yeah.
And the stakes for misreading that ecosystem are just incredibly high.
Which is exactly why we are wading right into those waters today. So welcome back to the Book Nook, the deep dive dedicated to exploring the most impactful and transformative books in self-help, spirituality, psychology, and personal growth.
It's great to be back. We've got a really essential one today.
We really do. Today we are doing a deep dive into the updated and expanded 10th anniversary edition of The First 90 Days, Proven Strategies for Getting Up to Speed Faster and Smarter by Michael D. Watkins.
A total classic in the field.
Truly. And we aren't just summarizing a book today, right? Our mission is to hand you a concrete, systematic framework to navigate what is easily the most vulnerable period of your professional life, a career transition.
Yeah, the vulnerability aspect is huge.
So whether you are, prepping for a massive promotion, onboarding at a brand new company, or you just love understanding the hidden mechanics of organizational psychology, this deep dive is your blueprint for taking charge.
Okay, let's unpack this because the statistics here are wild.
They really are staggering.
Roughly 25% of managers in Fortune 500 companies change jobs every single year. 25%.
Yeah, and you have to think about the ripple effect of that, because each one of those transitions impacts about a dozen people on average.
What, a dozen?
Right. Direct reports, peers, bosses. That means even if you aren't transitioning yourself right now, you're constantly dealing with the fallout of someone else who is trying to figure out their new job. I mean, it is a state of perpetual organizational flux.
But here's the number that really stopped me in my tracks, and it's the reason this framework is so vital. Independent research shows that a rigorous application of Watkins' principles can reduce the time it takes a new leader to reach full productivity by a massive 40%. And, what's fascinating here is that 40% is not a marginal incremental improvement. That is a staggering reduction in the time you spend floundering.
Right.
It's the difference between spending your first few months as a literal liability versus actively driving the business forward.
It's the difference between sinking and swimming. So for this deep dive, I want you, the listener, to kind of step into the shoes of a newly appointed leader. You've got the new title, you're looking at your new inbox. The calendar is already filling up with names you don't even recognize.
The absolute dread of that first week.
Exactly. And you are standing at the edge of the minefield that is your first 90 days.
Oh.
But before we get into the tactical strategies for surviving that minefield, we have to define what the ultimate goal of those first 3 months actually is and, what failure looks like. We need to talk about the concept of the break-even point.
Right. So the break-even point is basically the foundational economic reality of any job transition. I want you to imagine your very first day on a new job. No matter how brilliant you are, no matter how stellar your resume is.
No matter how much they're paying you.
Exactly. On day one, you are a net consumer of value.
You're a drain on the system.
You are. You are taking up people's time with questions. You are drawing a salary. You are utilizing HR resources. You are sitting in meetings trying to absorb context. But you haven't actually accomplished anything tangible for the bottom line yet.
Right, you haven't produced anything.
So the break-even point is that exact theoretical moment when you have finally contributed as much value to your new organization as you have consumed from it. From that day forward, and only from that day forward, are you a net contributor.
And Watkins notes that On average, when CEOs and presidents were surveyed, they estimated it takes a typical mid-level leader about 6.2 months to reach that break-even point.
Yeah.
6.2 months. That is over half a year of being an organizational liability.
And that 6.2-month window is precisely why transitions are so extraordinarily dangerous. I mean, you are operating under a microscope.
Yeah.
You have no established working relationships. You have no track record in this specific context that buys you the benefit of the doubt. People are scrutinizing your every move, how you speak in meetings, who you eat lunch with, what questions you ask.
It's terrifying when you put it like that.
It is, because opinions about your competence and your character form incredibly quickly, and once they solidify in an organization, they are almost impossible to reverse.
Which creates the perfect breeding ground for what Watkins calls the vicious cycle. I really want to unpack this because it feels like a horror story that happens in slow motion in offices every day. Walk us through how a capable leader falls into this downward spiral.
Well, the vicious cycle almost always starts with inadequate learning. You come in, you feel immense pressure to perform, and you just don't take the time to deeply understand the culture or the root causes of the problems you've inherited.
Okay, so you skip the homework.
Right. And because your learning is inadequate, your initial decisions are flawed. They might be logically sound on paper, but they are completely tone deaf to the reality of the organization.
Okay, so you make a bad call in, say, week 3. What happens next?
Because of that bad decision, you immediately lose credibility with your team or your boss. And when you lose credibility, you face organizational resistance. People put up walls.
Oh, yeah. The quiet quitting, basically.
Exactly. They stop volunteering critical information, they slow walk your initiatives, and they essentially cut you out of the informal communication loop, which means your learning becomes even worse, leading to even worse decisions. You are trapped in this self-reinforcing downward spiral of isolation and failure.
But let me challenge this underlying assumption for a second.
Yeah.
Let's say you were an absolute superstar at your last job. You crushed every metric. Do you just, suddenly lose your touch overnight? Do leaders fail because they are incompetent?
It's a great question, and the answer is almost universally no. Derailment almost never happens due to a lack of past success or, a sudden onset of incompetence.
Okay.
Everyone who derails was highly successful in their previous roles. That's exactly why they were promoted or poached in the first place. They fail because they fundamentally misunderstand the new situation or they lack the flexibility to adapt to it.
Wow.
They keep relying on the exact same behaviors and skills that made them successful in the past, completely missing the fact that the rules of the game have entirely changed.
Which is the tragedy of it, right? It's like they're playing chess, but the board is now set up for go.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
And if you recognize that, you can trigger the opposite dynamic, right? The virtuous cycle. You prioritize focused, structured learning, which leads to well-informed, culturally resonant decisions.
Yeah.
Those good decisions immediately increase your credibility, which builds supportive alliances, which means people want to share better information with you, and that accelerates your learning even further. You want to engineer that upward spiral from day one.
And to do that, you have to recognize when a transition is actually happening, which brings up one of the more insidious challenges Watkins identifies.
Oh, the hidden transitions. This concept blew my mind because it applies to literally everyone. A hidden transition is a massive change in your responsibility without a formal title change.
Those are so dangerous.
Right. Think about you, the listener, who just got handed the monumental task of, say, integrating AI across your firm's legacy systems. You didn't get a promotion. There was no announcement email from the CEO. Your email signature is exactly the same.
Yeah.
But your job just fundamentally changed.
Completely changed.
You are now dealing with new stakeholders, new technical challenges, and new political resistance.
And the danger is that because there's no formal title change, you don't treat tomorrow like day one of a new job. You don't build a 90-day plan. You just try to seamlessly fold this massive new mandate into your existing workflow. The most dangerous transition is the one you don't even realize you are in.
Because you aren't treating it with the care and strategy of a high-stakes scenario. And if you don't reset your approach, you are going to derail. Because failure in any transition comes from a lack of flexibility, the absolute first step you have to take, whether the transition is a massive public promotion or a quiet hidden one, is mentally letting go of your old role so you can adapt to the new one.
You have to actively prepare yourself for the shift.
Right, and that preparation looks radically different depending on whether you are being promoted internally or onboarding into a completely new company. Let's start with promotions.
Yeah, the common trap with promotions is assuming that because you already know the company, the culture, and the players, the transition will be seamless.
Like, I already have the badge. I
Yeah.
know where the cafeteria is. This will be easy.
Exactly, but internal promotions require a massive, often painful shift in perspective. You suddenly have to balance breadth and depth. When you move up a level, you are instantly dealing with a wider range of issues. But you can no longer afford to drill down into the details of any single issue the way you used to.
Yeah, you have to completely rethink what you delegate and who you trust. But perhaps the hardest psychological shift is that you have to change how you exert influence.
This is a huge one.
It's the shift from relying on authority to relying on politics. When you were lower down the hierarchy, you rely on your deep technical expertise and the direct authority of your job description. You are right because the data says you are right. But as you move up into senior leadership, the problems become highly ambiguous.
Very ambiguous.
There is rarely a single right, data-driven answer. Decisions are made based on influence, competing priorities, and organizational politics.
And you also have to exhibit a completely new leadership presence. You are now further from the front lines, meaning your words carry disproportionate weight. You are subject to intense, almost theatrical scrutiny. Every sigh in a meeting, every offhand comment is interpreted and magnified by the people below you.
Watkins gives a brilliant case study on this with Julia Gold. I want to talk about her. She was an absolute rock star in marketing. She was detailed, focused, heavily involved in the weeds, and incredibly competent. Because of that success, she gets promoted to a cross-functional leadership role.
Right.
She's now overseeing a major product launch, coordinating marketing, R&D, sales, and manufacturing.
Then what happens when the pressure hit, she fell back on her old strengths.
She completely reverted to what made her feel safe. She started micromanaging the marketing aspects of the launch, like literally demanding to see ad copy, tweaking the font on the packaging, because that's what made her feel confident and in control.
While completely dropping the ball on the bigger picture.
Yes. She neglected to manage the R&D and manufacturing teams, who were spiraling out of alignment. She failed to realize that leading a cross-functional team requires exerting influence without direct authority over the technical details. She alienated the other department heads, bottlenecked the marketing team she used to lead, and within a month and a half, the project was severely delayed and she was pulled from the role.
It's awful, but Julia is a textbook example of what happens when you don't make a clean mental break from your old job. She brought a specialist toolkit to a generalist's role.
Exactly.
But let's look at the other side of the transition coin, onboarding into a brand new company. Interestingly, HR professionals consistently rate this as significantly harder than an internal promotion.
Because you are dealing with the 4 pillars of onboarding simultaneously: business orientation, stakeholder connection, expectations alignment, and cultural adaptation. And that last one, cultural adaptation, is where the real blood is spilled. I look at the story of David Jones in the book, and it perfectly illustrates how blinding past success can be when entering a new culture.
Oh, the David Jones story it's painful to read.
It is. So David was a total command and control leader. He came from a massive hierarchical manufacturing giant where decisions were made at the top and executed flawlessly down the chain.
Yeah.
He gets hired as the new head of R&D at Energix, which is a rapidly growing but heavily consensus-driven startup.
And the CEO of Energis explicitly told David during the interview, "We need more discipline here, we need structure."
So David took that mandate and ran with it. He came in guns blazing. Without consulting anyone, he drafted a rigorous 50-page process redesign for the R&D department. He called a meeting with the senior management committee and basically said, "Here's the new process, implement it tomorrow."
And he hit an absolute brick wall.
Total stonewalling.
Yeah, the senior committee politely nodded in the meeting and then completely ignored his directives. David didn't understand the culture. He misunderstood his mandate. He thought the CEO saying "bring discipline" meant impose my old company's rigid structure immediately. He completely skipped the cultural adaptation pillar, assuming his sheer competence would force the organization to bend to his will.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this brings up one of my absolute favorite analogies in the book. Watkins says that joining a new company is a lot like an organ transplant. You are the new organ being dropped into a pre-existing system. If you aren't incredibly careful about how you integrate, the organizational immune system will recognize you as a foreign body, attack you, and literally reject you.
It sounds violent, but professionally, it's incredibly accurate.
It really is.
The host body has its own way of circulating blood, its own rhythms, its own defenses. If you disrupt them too aggressively, the white blood cells come out.
And when you feel that resistance, the natural human instinct is to lean even heavier on the skills that made you successful in the past. But Watkins compares that to exercising only your right arm. Your strong arm, maybe it's your technical brilliance or your commanding presence gets stronger and stronger, but your weak arm, your political nuance, your cultural empathy completely atrophies. You might look strong, but you are fundamentally unbalanced and ultimately ineffective.
Which is exactly why, to avoid triggering that organizational immune system, you have to prioritize understanding the host body before you try to change it. You have to map what Watkins calls the culture pyramid.
Let's unpack the culture pyramid because I think a lot of people mistake surface-level quirks for actual corporate culture.
Precisely. So imagine a pyramid with three distinct layers. The top layer, the visible peak, is made of surface symbols and languages. This is the easy stuff. It's how people dress. Do they wear suits or hoodies? It's the layout of the office. Is it open plan or closed doors? It's the specific acronyms they use in emails. It is very easy to see this layer and adopt it to blend in.
Right. You walk in, nobody is wearing a tie, so you take off your tie. You learn that EOD means 3 p.m. here, not 5 p.m. You adapt. It feels like you're assimilating.
But that's just the tip. Just below the surface is the second layer. Hidden norms and patterns of behavior. This is where it gets highly complex. This layer dictates how things actually get done, regardless of what the employee handbook says. For instance, are meetings genuine places for open, vigorous debate? Or are meetings just performative rubber stamp sessions for decisions that were actually hashed out in private hallway conversations beforehand?
Oh, that's a huge one. I mean, David Jones failed at Energix largely because he thought a meeting was the place to make a final decision, whereas the Energix culture used meetings purely for consensus building and airing grievances.
Exactly. Another hidden norm. Do you get rewarded here for being a brilliant solo superstar who breaks the rules to get results, or do you get rewarded for being a quiet, reliable team player who builds consensus? These norms are rarely written down, but violating them creates immense friction.
And then there's the bottom layer.
Yes, the massive foundation of the pyramid. Fundamental assumptions and values. These are the deeply held, often unconscious beliefs about how the world and human nature work.
Like what?
Like, is power inherently suspicious and something to be distributed? Or is authority respected and centralized? Is conflict viewed as a healthy crucible for innovation? Or is it seen as destructive and disrespectful? If you violate these foundational assumptions, the immune system won't just resist you, it will reject you immediately and permanently.
Wow. Okay, so you've done the mental work. You know you need to adapt. You understand you are walking into a complex pyramid of culture.
Yeah.
But the immediate agonizing urge when you start a new role is to jump in and do something to prove your worth. Right.
Yeah.
You want to justify your salary. You want to show the hiring committee they made the right choice. But Watkins argues that we have to actively fight this urge. He calls it the action imperative.
The action imperative is one of the most common and destructive psychological traps in a transition. It is the compulsive, almost physical need to take bold action before you actually understand the context. And what is vital to recognize is the source of this pressure. You often feel like the boss is demanding immediate results, but in reality, the action imperative usually stems from your own internal insecurities. You feel like an imposter. You are disoriented by the new environment, so you desperately want to do something that makes you feel competent and in control.
So you default to what you know. You come in with the answer, assuming that whatever solution worked at your last job will magically fix the unique problems of this new one.
Which brings us to the cautionary tale of Chris Hadley at Phoenix. Chris was a brilliant manufacturing engineer, brought in to fix a struggling quality assurance division. He came from a massively well-funded, state-of-the-art facility. He takes one look at Phoenix's tech stack and their makeshift processes, declares the entire operation antiquated, and immediately reorganizes the team based on the rigid, highly automated model of his old company.
He didn't ask questions. He just acted. And what happened? Productivity plummeted. Quality metrics actually got worse. And it wasn't because his new design was theoretically bad. It was because he failed to learn why things were structured that way in the first place.
He had no context.
None. The Phoenix team had actually been incredibly creative and resilient in dealing with a severe lack of capital investment for over a decade. They were immensely proud of what they had built with, essentially duct tape and wire. By coming in with the answer and immediately dismissing their work as garbage, Chris alienated a deeply proud workforce and completely destroyed his own credibility on day one.
Chris acted without learning. He allowed the action imperative to override the crucial step of structured learning.
Hmm.
If you want to survive the first 90 days, you cannot just passively absorb information. You have to build a deliberate, structured learning agenda. You need to relentlessly ask questions about the past. How did we get here? What initiatives have we tried before that failed, and why? You need questions about the present. What is our actual strategy as opposed to the stated strategy on the website? And questions about the future. What are the unexploited opportunities that no one is talking about?
And you cannot just interview your direct reports. They have a vested interest in framing the narrative in a way that protects them. You have to triangulate the truth by consulting diverse sources. You need to talk to the frontline workers who actually touch the product. You need to talk to external analysts or key customers. And my personal favorite, you need to find the natural historians.
The natural historians are critical. These are the people who have been at the company for 15 or 20 years. They might not be in senior leadership, but they possess institutional memory.
You know everything.
They know where all the bodies are buried, they know why the legacy systems were built the way they were, and they know the hidden political alliances that aren't on any org chart.
But practically speaking, if I'm the listener stepping into a new role tomorrow, how do I actually execute this? If I just start setting up 30-minute meetings and grilling people, it's going to feel like an interrogation. So this raises an important question. How do we organize this learning efficiently so we aren't just drinking from a fire hose and so we don't terrify the staff?
Watkins provides a brilliantly simple yet highly structured method for this. He suggests setting up one-on-one meetings with your direct reports and key stakeholders and asking them the exact same 5 standard questions.
I wrote these down because they are so actionable for anyone listening. Let's go through them. Question 1. What are the biggest challenges the organization is facing right now?
A great baseline question.
Question 2. Why is the organization facing these challenges?
Which gets to the root cause.
Question 3. What are the most promising, unexploited opportunities for growth? Question 4. What would need to happen for the organization to actually exploit those opportunities? And question 5, the absolute kicker. If you were me, what would you focus your attention on?
The genius of this framework isn't just in the questions themselves, it's in the uniformity of asking the exact same questions to everyone. When you do that, you can literally line up the answers side by side. You will immediately see patterns. You'll see where there is massive consensus. Maybe everyone agrees the legacy CRM software is destroying productivity. But more importantly, you'll see where there is deep fractured division.
Yes. If the VP of Marketing says the biggest challenge is product quality and the VP of Product says the biggest challenge is marketing's unrealistic promises, you've just uncovered a massive organizational fault line.
Exactly. And you also observe behavioral tells. When you ask, why are we facing these challenges? You see who takes personal responsibility and who immediately points fingers at other departments. That information is pure gold for figuring out who you can trust. This structured approach accelerates your learning exponentially, and it prevents you from being manipulated by any single narrative.
I love this as a thought experiment for you, the listener. Imagine approaching your next big project, or even just your next 30 days in your current job, strictly as a natural historian or an organizational anthropologist before you make a single decision. No fixing, no tweaking, just observing, mapping the culture, and asking those 5 questions. The sheer amount of context you would gather before you make a move would make your eventual decisions incredibly potent.
And that leads to the ultimate purpose of this learning phase. The reason you spend all that time mapping the terrain isn't just for intellectual curiosity. It is to diagnose exactly what kind of organizational situation you have stepped into. Because the reality you uncover completely dictates the leadership strategy you must deploy.
Which transitions us seamlessly from learning into strategy. This is where Watkins introduces the STARS model, which is arguably the most famous framework from the book. STARS is an acronym representing the 5 distinct business situations a leader might inherit. But before we just recite what the letters stand for, let's talk about the underlying tension here. When you arrive at a new company, there's always this immediate tension. Am I here to play savior and perform emergency surgery? Or am I here to be a steward and carefully maintain a machine that is already working?
That tension is the core of the STARS model. If you misdiagnose the situation, if you play savior when the organization needs a steward or vice versa, you will fail, regardless of how talented you are. So let's break down the portfolio. The first situation is a startup. The defining characteristic here is excited confusion.
Right.
You've got incredible energy, passionate people, and big ideas, but a desperate need for focus, structure, and scalable processes.
Okay, so that's the S.
Then the second is a turnaround. The mood here is generally despair or exhaustion. The ship is taking on water fast, metrics are plummeting, and there is an acute need for rapid, heroic, and often deeply painful surgery.
The third is accelerated growth. The company is succeeding, perhaps wildly, but it's stretching at the seams. The original team is burning out. The need here is to bring in scalable discipline and robust systems without killing the entrepreneurial spirit.
Right. And then the fourth is realignment. This one is notoriously tricky.
Oh, yeah.
The prevailing mood is often deep denial, problems are mounting, maybe a new competitor is gaining market share, or a core technology is becoming obsolete, but because the company is still currently profitable, there is no acute crisis. Your job is to pierce the veil of denial and initiate change without causing widespread panic.
And finally, the second S, sustaining success. Things are going great. The company is at the top of its game, but the danger is that complacency is creeping in. The leader's job here is to invent a new challenge to keep top performers motivated and prevent stagnation.
The brilliance of the STARS framework is how it highlights the fatal danger of a mismatch strategy. Let's really contrast a turnaround and a realignment, because this is where so many experienced leaders crash and burn.
Please do, because this is fascinating.
In a turnaround, the business is hemorrhaging money. The house is actively on fire. In that scenario, you absolutely need a hero leadership style. You have to move incredibly fast. You have to be decisive. You will likely have to make unilateral decisions to cut non-core product lines and lay off staff. The organization actually expects you to be a bit of a dictator with a sword because they know they are dying.
But what happens if you bring that exact same hero energy, the speed, the sword, the unilateral decision-making into a realignment?
It is an absolute disaster. In a realignment, the company might have made $50 million in profit last year, but you, the new leader, can see a massive market disruption coming in 3 years. If you rush in on day one with a sword, start firing executives, and demand radical, immediate structural change, the organizational immune system will go into overdrive.
They'll think you're crazy.
Exactly. They will look at you like you are completely unhinged. They will say, "We are highly profitable. We are hitting our current targets. What is wrong with this person?" You will trigger massive, coordinated resistance.
Because there's no visible fire.
Right. In a realignment, you cannot be a hero. You must become a steward. You have to move deliberately. You must focus intensely on cultural and political learning. You have to spend months slowly building awareness of the impending threat, sharing data, and building consensus around the need for change before you actually execute the change.
It's the difference between yelling fire in a burning building versus calmly explaining the long-term benefits of installing a sprinkler system to people who have never seen a fire.
That's a great analogy.
But I have to ask you on behalf of the listener, because we use examples of CEOs and VPs a lot, what if I'm not running a Fortune 500 company? What if I'm a mid-level manager taking over a small department or just a project lead? Does this macro stars model actually apply to me?
Oh, absolutely. It scales perfectly to absolutely every level of an organization. The psychological dynamics of change are fractal. They look the same at the micro level as they do at the macro level.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If you are a mid-level marketing manager launching a brand new product line from scratch with a small team, you are in a startup situation. You need to build structure out of the void. If you inherit a toxic, dysfunctional 5-person IT support team that misses every single SLA deadline and hates each other, you are leading a turnaround. It doesn't matter if it's 5 people or 5,000 people. The emotional terrain and the required leadership strategies to navigate those specific situations are exactly the same.
Okay, so let's synthesize where we are. You've mentally broken from your old job. You've resisted the action imperative and prioritized learning. You've mapped your stars situation so you know what kind of game you're playing. Now you face the most critical hurdle of the entire transition you have, to align your diagnosis of reality with the single most important person in your professional life. We are talking about negotiating success with your new boss.
Make no mistake, your boss is the absolute linchpin of your transition. They control your budget, they run political interference for you, they interpret your early actions to the wider organization, and ultimately they're the one evaluating your success.
Right.
You cannot leave the development of this relationship to chance, and you certainly can't assume they know how to manage you. You must systematically initiate what Watkins calls the 5 conversations with your boss.
Let's unpack these 5 conversations because, frankly, most people only ever have 1 or 2 of these, and usually only when something goes wrong.
True.
Conversation 1 is the situational diagnosis. This is essentially asking, do we agree on the STARS portfolio? Because if you think you've inherited a turnaround and you need to make painful cuts, but your boss thinks the department is sustaining success and just needs a little polish, you are on a collision course for disaster.
Precisely. You have to establish a shared reality first. And then conversation 2 is expectations. This sounds obvious, but it is rarely done rigorously. You need to ask, what exactly does success look like in the next 30, 60, and 90 days? How specifically will my performance be measured? What are the non-negotiables?
Wait, let me pause you there. What if your boss is the type who gives incredibly vague expectations, like just get in there and make the team more agile, or just optimize the workflow? How do you force clarity out of a vague boss?
You do it by bringing them concrete proposals to react to. If they say, make the team more agile, you say, great. Does that mean reducing our sprint cycle from 3 weeks to 2 weeks by the end of Q2? Or does that mean adopting a completely new software tracking system? You force them to choose between tangible outcomes. You don't let them hide behind buzzwords.
That is incredibly practical. Okay, conversation 3 is style. This is about the mechanics of your relationship. How do they prefer to communicate? Do they want a dense daily bullet point email? Or do they hate reading and prefer a weekly hour-long deep dive conversation? Do they want you to come to them with a problem immediately or only when you have 3 proposed solutions?
And then conversation 4 is resources. Once you agree on the diagnosis and the expectations, you have to ask, what do I critically need to actually achieve what we just agreed upon? Do I need more budget? Do I need the authority to replace a toxic manager? You negotiate this up front while you still have the leverage of the honeymoon period.
And finally, conversation 5 is personal development. This takes immense vulnerability. It's sitting down and saying, here is where I'm strong, but here are my blind spots in this new context. How can you, as my boss, help me grow in those areas?
It really does take vulnerability.
The book illustrates the power of managing this dynamic with the story of Michael Chen. Michael was a highly collaborative, deliberate planner who was promoted to Chief Information Officer. His new boss was Vaughn Cates, the COO, who had a reputation for being an absolute terror.
Oh, yeah.
People literally told Michael she'll eat you alive because she was a ruthless, impatient executor who demanded immediate action.
So what did Michael do? Did he panic and try to become a ruthless executor overnight? No.
Yeah.
He proactively managed the relationship. Before day 1, he went to Vaughn and laid out a strict, systematic 30-day learning plan. He negotiated for that runway, explicitly telling her he would not be making structural changes until day 30.
Which is bold.
It is. Now, old habits die hard. At week 3, Vaughn got impatient and heavily pressured him to make a multi-million-dollar systems purchase immediately. It was a massive test of his boundary.
Oh, I bet.
But Michael held firm to the timeline they had negotiated in conversation 2. He politely but firmly deferred the decision. He delivered a stellar, comprehensive plan exactly on day 30, and he ultimately won her deep respect. He negotiated his own success by actively shaping the rules of engagement rather than just cowering and reacting to her pressure.
But I'm going to push back on this whole framework because it feels a bit backwards to me. Isn't it fundamentally the boss's job to onboard their new employee properly? Why does the burden of structuring all these conversations fall entirely on the person who is already overwhelmed by the transition?
It's a fair frustration. I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture of modern corporate life, relying on your boss to transition you properly is a massive abdication of your own agency.
Yeah.
Yes, in a utopian business world, your boss would flawlessly execute all 5 of those conversations, provide perfect context, and guide you seamlessly. But in reality, your boss is likely chronically overwhelmed, distracted by their own pressures, or frankly, they might just be a mediocre manager.
Right.
You must take 100% responsibility for making the relationship work. Do not stay away because you assume they are too busy. If they give you a lot of rope, you have to resist the urge to take it and run off into a silo. You get on their calendar. You force the alignment. You own your transition because no one else will.
And that reality leads directly into what Watkins calls the golden rule of transitions. It's beautifully simple. You should transition your own direct reports the exact way you wish your boss would transition you. If you are frustrated by a lack of clarity and support from above, you better make sure you are actively providing that clarity, structure, and support to the people reporting to you.
Exactly. You break the cycle of poor onboarding. And the most tangible output of all these conversations with your boss should be the 90-day plan. This isn't a vague mental outline. It is a written contract, ideally broken into 30-day chunks, that specifies your priorities, your learning goals, and exactly what tangible things you're going to deliver and when. It ensures that you and your boss are completely tethered to the same reality.
All right, so you've bought yourself time, you've diagnosed the stars situation, you've got the boss aligned, and the 90-day plan signed off. Now, we arrive at the pressure cooker. The honeymoon is ending, and you actually have to deliver tangible results. Okay. It's time to secure early wins. But Watkins issues a massive, flashing red warning light here regarding what he calls the low-hanging fruit trap. First, let's contextualize this by explaining his concept of the waves of change.
Right. So Watkins' research shows that successful, sustainable transitions don't happen via one massive, continuous earthquake of change. They happen in distinct, deliberate waves. The first wave is the transition phase, which is heavily focused on the structured learning we discussed. The second wave is the immersion phase. This is usually where you launch your first wave of early win changes. The third wave is reshaping. This happens later and involves making the deep, often painful structural and strategic changes to the core of the organization. And finally, consolidation. This is critical. You can't just mandate change constantly. You have to pause, let the organization breathe, allow the new behaviors to settle, and then prepare for the next wave.
And the primary goal of that second wave immersion is the early win. You need a victory to put points on the board. But what exactly is the low-hanging fruit trap? Because in business, we are constantly told to grab the low-hanging fruit for a quick win.
The trap is expending all your finite political capital and energy on easy, superficial fixes that do absolutely nothing to advance your long-term strategic business goals. Let's say you take over a department where morale is terrible and turnover is high. The low-hanging fruit is painting the dingy break room, buying a high-end espresso machine, and implementing casual Fridays. Everyone is thrilled for a week. You look like a hero. But if your ultimate strategic goal, the thing you and your boss agreed upon in your 90-day plan, is to increase enterprise software sales by 20%, that espresso machine did absolutely nothing to change the fundamental behaviors required to hit that target.
So it's a distraction.
Exactly. Early wins must do double duty. Yes, they must build short-term momentum and goodwill, but they must simultaneously instill the long-term behavioral changes you actually need in the organization.
Elena Lee's story in the book illustrates this double duty concept perfectly. She was promoted to head of customer service, and she inherited a department with slumping satisfaction scores. She needed a win. She could have just hired a consultant to write a slicker, more modern script for the call center reps that's a classic low-hanging fruit fix.
Yep, the easy way up.
But because she did her learning, she realized the root cause of the bad service was actually a toxic, authoritarian culture left behind by her predecessor. Her reps were terrified of making a mistake, so they rigidly adhered to policies, even when it infuriated the customers.
So Elena chose early wins that specifically combated that culture of fear and disempowerment.
Right. When supervisors tried to write up reps for small, well-intentioned errors, she didn't just quietly override the write-up. She used those incidents as highly visible, teachable moments. She publicly supported the reps who used common sense to help a customer, and she actively retrained the supervisors on how to coach rather than punish.
That's brilliant.
She fixed a short-term problem, a bad customer interaction, but she did it in a way that fundamentally changed the long-term behavior of her management team. She changed the culture to reach the business goal. So what does this all mean? I used an analogy when reading this section that really solidified it for me. Seeking only low-hanging fruit is like launching a rocket using only a first-stage booster. You hit the ignition, you get a massive, spectacular blast of fire and noise, and you lift off the launch pad. Everyone cheers. You got to win.
Yeah.
But without a second stage, which represents those deep structural behavioral changes, gravity inevitably takes over, and your rocket just falls right back to Earth in a ball of fire.
That is a phenomenal visualization. To keep that rocket climbing into orbit, those early wins have to carefully build your personal credibility. You want to cultivate a reputation of being demanding, but entirely capable of being satisfied when standards are met. You want to be accessible and approachable, but not overly familiar or entangled in office gossip. You want to project decisiveness without making reckless, unvetted calls. And crucially, while you are busy securing these early wins, you have to constantly keep one eye scanning the horizon for what Watkins calls predictable surprises.
Predictable surprises. It sounds like an oxymoron. What does that mean?
It does sound like a contradiction, but it's a very real phenomenon. These are ticking time bombs in the external environment or internal politics that you could have seen coming if you were paying attention, but you ignored them because you were too intensely focused on harvesting that low-hanging fruit.
Like what?
Well, a predictable surprise might be a massive regulatory shift that everyone in the industry knows is being debated, but you haven't prepared for it. Or it might be the simmering resentment of a key executive who has passed over for the job you just got. If one of those predictable surprises detonates, your carefully crafted 90-day plan goes straight out the window, and you are trapped in a cycle of perpetual reactive crisis management.
Okay, so assuming you dodge the predictable time bombs, you secure the double-duty early wins, and you build up a war chest of political capital. Now you move into the really heavy lifting of a transition. You transition into the reshaping wave. This is where you have to play organizational architect.
Up until now, you've been learning, testing the waters, and making tweaks. Now, you have to ensure that the fundamental architecture of the organization actually supports the strategic direction you want to go. This means achieving tight alignment between four critical elements: your strategy, your structure, your core systems, and your skill bases.
All four have to match.
Yes. If you establish a strategy of rapid, agile product innovation, but your organizational structure is heavily siloed and bureaucratic, and your people only possess skills in maintaining legacy products well, you are completely misaligned. You are trying to run a marathon in concrete shoes.
This is exactly what Hannah Jaffe faced. She was an external HR consultant who was brought in as a corporate VP. She walked into an executive team that was in such intense vitriolic conflict they were barely speaking to one another. Everyone thought it was just a clash of toxic personalities. But Hannah diagnosed that the root cause was massive structural misalignment.
Right.
The incentive systems pitted departments against each other. She had to diagnose those architectural flaws and support the CEO in completely rebuilding the structure to force collaboration. Which brings us to what is, for most people, the most emotionally taxing part of reshaping the architecture: team building. You inherit a team, you didn't hire them, what do you do?
The biggest trap leaders fall into here is keeping an underperforming inherited team intact for far too long. And they usually do it out of a misplaced desire to be nice or a fear of being seen as ruthless. But if you don't have the right people on the bus, your strategy is irrelevant. You will fail. Watkins argues that you need to rigorously evaluate your inherited talent and place them into one of four distinct categories: keep, develop, replace, or observe. And critically, you need to set hard deadlines in your 90-day plan for making these final determinations.
Let's talk about how you actually evaluate someone that fast.
Yeah.
How do you distinguish between someone who needs to be replaced and someone who just needs development?
You look for the gap between their current capability and the requirements of the STARS situation you are in. If you are in a turnaround, you need people with a bias for immediate action and high tolerance for stress. If you have an executive who is brilliant at long-term strategic theory but paralyzed by short-term crisis, they might be highly talented, but they are the wrong fit for the current architecture.
Right.
They belong in a sustaining success environment.
Yeah.
That's a replace decision, not because they are incompetent, but because of a situational mismatch. Develop, on the other hand, is for someone who possesses the raw talent and the cultural fit, but perhaps lacks a specific technical skill or management experience that you can actively coach them on.
Liam, the VP of sales in the book, is a great example of executing this. He aggressively assessed his team right out of the gate. He knew he needed absolute high performers to drive his top priority A-item initiatives. He didn't hesitate to move underperformers out.
Yeah, he acted decisively.
And once he had the right team in place, he used a blend of what Watkins calls push and pull tools to align them. The push tools are the structural forcing mechanisms, like setting aggressive KPIs, changing reporting lines, and restructuring financial incentives. The pull tools are the motivational elements, like painting a deeply compelling shared vision for the future that makes people want to achieve the goals.
And it's vital to remember that you can't just focus on your direct reports. That's a massive blind spot. To truly reshape an organization, you have to build alliances, because your success ultimately depends on your ability to influence people who exist completely outside your direct line of control: peers, cross-functional teams, external partners. Direct authority is simply not enough to drive complex change. You have to map out the influence landscape.
So how do you map it?
You need to identify who are your natural supporters, who are your entrenched opponents, and most importantly, who are the swing voters, the people who are currently neutral but possess the influence to tip the scales.
This is exactly where Alexia Blanco at MedDev crashed and
Oh.
burned. She was a brilliant technical leader, but she became incredibly frustrated by the bureaucracy at headquarters when she tried to push her initiative through. Why? Because she tried to lead solely with her positional authority. She essentially walked into meetings and said, I'm the boss of this division. This is the logically correct path. Do it.
Ouch.
Yeah. She didn't map the influence landscape at all. She didn't bother to discover the intrinsic motivations of the pivotal people in other departments who were blocking her. She didn't offer them anything of value like budget sharing, public credit, resource trades in exchange for their support. She just demanded compliance, and the immune system rejected her.
Because influence is rarely about demanding compliance. True influence is about deeply understanding what other people need, what their pressures are, and framing your initiatives in a way that actively helps them achieve their own goals.
Let me ask you a very practical question about this phase, because this happens all the time and it's incredibly awkward. How do you evaluate and restructure a team and maybe replace people without sounding like you are just viciously criticizing the previous leadership?
Yeah.
You don't want to come in on day 30, fire 2 people, change the software, and employ, wow, the last guy who sat in this chair was a total idiot.
That is a critical political trap to avoid. Criticizing the previous leader gains you absolutely nothing, and it often deeply alienates the people who were loyal to them or who helped build the very systems you are tearing down. You must relentlessly focus your messaging on current behaviors and future goals.
Okay, so how does that sound in practice?
You never say, the way you guys used to handle customer complaints was terrible and inefficient. Instead, you say, given our new aggressive growth targets for next year and the changing expectations of the market, we need to evolve our processes to move much faster.
Oh, I love that framing.
Yeah.
Given our new targets, it completely takes the emotion and the personal judgment out of it. It makes the change about the future environment, not the past mistakes.
Exactly. You refuse to waste a single ounce of energy bashing past decisions. You make the conversation entirely, 100% about what the team needs to do tomorrow to win in the new reality.
Okay, we have reached the final major pillar of the framework. We've talked about strategy, alignment, bosses, and teams. But let's be incredibly real for a second. You cannot successfully lead a complex organization through a high-stakes transition if you are personally falling apart behind the scenes. Transitions are an absolute emotional roller coaster.
They absolutely are, and this is the part of leadership development that is so rarely discussed, honestly. It is incredibly easy to slide into severe isolation during a transition. You get overwhelmed by the sheer volume of new information, the pressure to perform mounts, you work longer and longer hours, and as a result, you stop talking to people, you stop exercising, you neglect your support system.
Yeah.
To combat this, Watkins argues you have to aggressively do 2 things. First, you must stabilize the home front. If you are destroying value and creating chaos at home, it is biologically and psychologically impossible to consistently create value at work over the long term.
Oh, man. The cautionary tale of Steven Erickson in the book is brutal. He was a rising star who got a massive promotion and moved his family from New York to Toronto. He basically assumed, hey, Canada's basically the same as the U.S. They speak English. This will be an easy, seamless transition.
Big mistake.
Huge. He completely failed to stabilize his home front. His spouse was deeply struggling with the isolation of the move. His kids were uprooted and unhappy. And instead of addressing it, Stephen just threw himself deeper into his work hours to avoid the stress at home. Of course, his family's stress amplified his own internal stress, completely destroying his focus at the office. He started making erratic decisions. He spiraled because he was fighting a 2-front war, and you cannot win a 2-front war during a 90-day transition.
It's tragic, but it is remarkably common. The physical and emotional logistics of a transition have to be managed just as rigorously as the business strategy. And the second thing you must do to manage yourself is proactively build a robust advice and counsel network.
Okay, what does that look like?
Well, when you are the new boss, people filter information before it gets to you. You cannot rely solely on your internal team for unvarnished truth. You need to cultivate 3 specific types of advisors. First, technical advisors. These are the experts who can help you rapidly get up to speed on the hard skills, the specific technologies, or the niche market dynamics of the new business.
Right, the subject matter experts.
Exactly. Second, cultural interpreters. We talked about the hidden norms of the pyramid earlier. You need someone, often a peer or a trusted natural historian, who can pull you aside and say, hey, I know you thought that meeting went well, but here's what people were actually thinking when you said that.
Well, that is so valuable.
It's a lifesaver. And third, Political counselors, these are the mentors, often outside your direct chain of command, who can help you objectively navigate the complex web of alliances and landmines without having a vested interest in your department's budget. You simply cannot navigate the muddy waters alone.
And finally, the book challenges us to move beyond just our own individual survival. It asks us to scale these principles to the enterprise level, accelerating everyone. I mean, think about the compounding cost. If 25% of a massive corporation's leadership is transitioning every year and they're all floundering for 6.2 months, the lost value is astronomical.
It's billions of dollars globally.
Watkins suggests using tools like a transition heat map to track exactly where the big leadership shifts are happening across the company. So HR and executive leadership can deploy targeted support before the vicious cycle begins.
And this is where elite companies truly separate themselves from the rest. If a company doesn't systematically support transitions, if they don't train their people in a common language like the STARS model, or mandate the 5 conversations as part of standard onboarding, they are essentially subjecting their top talent to a setup-to-fail dynamic.
Yeah,
They take their best, brightest people, promote them into incredibly complex new environments, and then essentially abandon them to figure out the unwritten rules by trial and error.
it's so backwards.
And a key part of supporting them is understanding the crucial difference between developmental coaching and transition coaching. Developmental coaching is great. It's about building long-term behavioral competencies over years. But transition coaching is acute. It is about urgent business acumen, rapid political mapping, and immediate strategic alignment. When someone is in their first 90 days, they don't need a personality assessment. They need a tactical playbook.
Wow. We have covered an immense amount of ground today. For anyone listening who identifies as a continuous learner, the first 90 days is an absolute masterpiece of professional strategy. It takes the terrifying, overwhelming, often paralyzing ambiguity of a new job, a massive promotion, or a hidden transition, and it turns it into a solvable, systematic puzzle. You don't have to rely on guesswork or just hope your past skills will carry you through.
Not at all.
You systematically diagnose the STARS situation. You aggressively prioritize structured learning over the action imperative. You negotiate reality with your boss. You secure double-duty early wins to build momentum. You align the architecture of your team, and you relentlessly manage your own psychology.
It replaces the panic of the unknown with a proven process.
It really does. It gives you the X-ray machine for the murky waters. So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your week. What if you didn't wait for a brand new job title or a massive corporate merger to use this framework? What if you treated every new major project, every shift in your team's configuration, or even just the start of every new quarter as a miniature transition? What if you applied the rigor of the 90-day plan with its intense focus on structured learning, securing strategic early wins, and forcing alignment with your boss to your current job, starting tomorrow morning?
I guarantee you would see a massive acceleration in your own effectiveness and influence, even if you've been sitting in the exact same role for 5 years.
Yes, exactly. Don't let your professional life remain a murky, unreadable landscape where you are just guessing at what's broken and hoping for the best. Use this framework to bring precision, clarity, and deliberate strategic action to every phase of your career. If this deep dive gave you some of those aha moments and helped clear the muddy waters, be sure to subscribe to the Book Nook so you never miss our explorations into the ideas and frameworks that shape our growth. We are here to help you navigate the complexities of your professional and personal life. And we really want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us which book you'd like us to explore next. We read every single one. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.